Hello. We're going to talk about a new machine, Serger. Not new to the world, but new to us in the class. New to y'all in the class, I guess, rather. So Serger looks very different than a regular sewing machine. So for one thing, we've got multiple threads here. So this one, we've got 3 threads threaded, but it can have up to 4 threads, okay? And each one has its own tension, and they go through a much more complicated threading process. So these 2 threads are the loopers. These 2 are for the needles. So you'll have 1 or 2 needle, but you will always have 2 loopers. There's also a 5-thread serger. That's a little bit more of a specialty serger. And if you look at if you took almost any article of clothing that you own, that you have purchased from a store, if you look at any of the seams, you're going to see thread kind of wrapped over the edge of the seam, okay? That's what the serger does, right? It finishes, it can sew the seam together, it trims the edge, the seam allowance down, and it overlocks the edge. It's also called an overlock machine, so that you've got a nice finished complete seam, so that's not going to ravel. These are great not addendums, but accessories to a sewing machine. You can't do a buttonhole on these. You can't insert a zipper. If you're never going to do a closure, then you could probably, and especially if you do a lot of knits, you could probably exist just using a serger. But if you want to do some more advanced techniques or some closures, you will need the sewing machine. So we're not going to go through threading all of this because, like I said, it is fairly complicated. Very rarely are you going to use one. If you do use one, then most of them come with some type of video, and they do have some pretty clear diagrams on threading them, and it's just a matter of kind of getting used to it. This one's also has a free arm. And something we didn't talk about a lot when we were talking about sewing machines is free arm versus flatbed. Most of the sewing machines that you're going to buy today are free arm sewing machines, which basically means you've got space around the entire arm, so you could put like a sleeve or a tube or something through that. A flatbed sewing machine, which is what you're going to see in a lot of older sewing machines, or if you have a family sewing machine that came from a parent or grandparent or great-grandparent that's in a cabinet, then it's probably a flatbed machine, which means that you've just got this top surface to work with. You can't slide anything over this arm, okay? So you just have to work on the inside of a tube or sleeve as opposed to being able to slide that over. A lot of sergers nowadays have a piece that you can remove here, so it's most often used as a flatbed version, but this one, you've got the piece that can be removed, that's removed at this time to make it a free arm. But also, so we've got our loopers that go through this kind of complicated guy here. This one doesn't come off. Sometimes this side comes off, and they kind of have to go back this way and come back this way, and then our threads come down, and like I said, we're only using 1 needle, but often you have 2. If you're going to sew a seam, if it's a construction seam you're doing on the serger, then you definitely want 2 needles. We're just finishing an existing seam, so we only need the 1, okay? And that's mostly what we use sergers for in costuming, is to finish raw edges. And we tend to finish those raw edges before we sew the 2 sides of the seam together, because again, that helps us with alterability. If we were to serge and trim the edge as you usually do on a serger, then we've taken away the alterability. We don't have any room to make that seam larger, or we can make the garment smaller, but actually make the seam larger, but we can't make the seam smaller, which would make the garment larger, okay? So that's a serger. The other crazy important thing to know about the serger is right in here, there's a blade, okay? So there's a blade here and a blade opposite underneath the throat plate, okay? So as you stitch, it will actually cut your edge of your fabric away. We're actually not going to be trimming any of our fabric away. We're going to be just riding along the edge of that blade so that we retain the full seam allowance, but we're still finishing the edge. I will do a little demo with the scrap piece of paper so you can see how it does cut as you go along. All right. So that's your serger. It also has a presser foot that has to be down when you're sewing. The arm on this one is over here. A lot of the sergers, your arm is on the side instead of in the back because you've got the threads and everything back here. But some of them they're on the back as well. Some of them they're on this side, but most often they're on this side. So let's see what this sucker does. All right, so I've got a little piece of fabric here. Now I'm going to put this in, and we've got, it's hard, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but there's some lines here that much like there are guidelines on your sewing machine throat plate. This one's got a heavier, thicker line, which is 5/8, which means the needle is 5/8 of an inch away. But if I sew a 5/8 inch seam with my serger using the blade and that line, see how it's cutting that away as I'm sewing. Now there's no back stitch on this machine, you just kind of run it out until it kind of stops. So I'm going to end this. I'll just keep my foot on the pedal until I've got enough of a tail that I can access it to cut it off. So now that's my serged edge. So now that's all finished. I do have a seam here as well, okay? If this was going to be my regular finished seam, I would have 2 needles, so this would be stronger and we wouldn't get that pull away right there. But that's what our finished serged edge looks like. And that's what it looks like when it's cutting. Like I said, we're not going to be cutting our edges, okay? So what we are working with now is we've got our vest, and what we need to do is we need to close these side seams so it actually becomes a garment and not just a poncho to drape over our shoulders. So what I want to do is I'm going to serge these raw edges together, and then after that we're going to sew them in a regular 5/8 inch seam. Again, that allows us alterability. So because I know I don't want to trim any of this off, now what you do want to do is make sure those 2 edges are matching up as you go through the machine, or else it might only catch one layer and then you will need to go back through, okay? But if I line my foot up so I can see the blade right there is the blade, and there's a big raised part of the foot to show me where that's right up against that blade. That's going to be my guideline to know that I can sew right there without having it trim off. And if it trims off like a little sliver, that's fine. You just don't want a big chunk of it cut off, because then we've changed the size of our seam, okay? You also want to be careful that you don't get any extra fabric bunched under there, because there is a blade, and I have cut holes in fabric by accident by having it get caught up under there. On the sewing machine, if it gets caught, we just pull it out with the seam ripper because we don't have a blade to contend with, right? All right, make sure your edges are the same. Make sure you're running the edge of this fabric right along where that blade is. And then when we get to the end, you don't pull, you just keep your foot on the pedal until you've got enough chain. Then you'll just trim that off. All right, so there's our finished side seam number 1. We have to do this 4 times, right? We have a right and a left side seam on the front, right and a left on the back. Pardon me. And you don't need to pin this, and you shouldn't, because like I said, there's a blade involved, and the last thing we want is to cut through a pin with our serger blade, which I have also done, which is not good, because then it puts a big nick in your blade and dulls it. All right, those are my fronts. Now I'll do my 2 back side seams. And as you can see, I did trim off a little, but it's just a little sliver, okay? Now you're going to check both sides and make sure that you've cut both layers. And I have this time. There have been times when I have not. Now we'll trim this away. So we have now prepped our side seams for stitching. Now if you do not have an access to a serger at home, that's all right. What you can do is do a zigzag instead, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Okay, so that's the serger and how to use it if you have access to one, or if you want to come in here and have access to the ones here. If you do not have access to a serger and you want to finish your side seams, then what you're going to do is you'll come up here to the top knob here. You're going to turn the dial all the way to 5. We'll leave this on 2.5, but this is going to give us a width, and this is going to turn us into a zigzag. All right. So then what you'll do is you'll just put your foot, your fabric. So, and if you're basically you want the needle to come to the edge of the fabric here. So you just kind of test it to see where to line it up so that it does that. And you don't need to backstitch. And what you'll do is just zigzag over that edge. Just as close to the edge as you can get it. Now you can't see that because I have serging here. But let me show you what that will look like if you're just doing that on a piece of fabric. All right, so say this is your side seam. I happen to know that this foot, if I just line the edge of my fabric up with the edge of this U-shaped opening, it's going to be in the right place. Okay, so that's what it'll look like if you just use a zigzag. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. So you just need to finish the edge off in some way. If you have access to serger, great. If not, then do a zigzag. Okay? So once you have your edges finished, I'm going to set this back to 0, so now I'm back to straight stitch. So now I'm going to take my vest, and from the shoulders, I'm going to lay this right sides together, right? That's the right side. It's on the inside now. So we're matching our side seams up with the right sides together, okay? Now if you've put your notches here, you probably can't see them because now they're inside the garment. So you could transfer to the outside before you close off your seam, or if you've cut the notch, you will probably be able to still see it. But if not, you just want to make sure it's lying flat the whole length, and make sure that it's matched at the top and the bottom. Okay, so those two sides are together, right sides. We'll do the same with this side. And the notches are really far more important when you have a curved or some type of shaped seam or sleeve. They're not as crucial when we get to straight seams, but it's still nice to have that kind of marker. So if you have access to it visually, great. If you don't, you're going to be fine. Okay, now I've pinned my side seams together. Now I come to the machine. 5/8 back stitch, okay. All right, and now we do the other one. Five-eighths back stitch, and back stitch again. All right, now the final step, so now we have it all together, is to press these seams open. And voila, we have a vest. You have made an entire garment. Woohoo! All right, and we're all done. This is what it should look like. It might have real pockets, it might just have the welt, but you're gonna have the vest together, side seams, bag lined, belt, and there you go. All right, that's a vest. Thank you very much.